can just do some talking there. So I tell people just a little introduction of myself. I was with the Lower Kuskokwim School District for 25 years. I actually went to high school in Bethel, and my dad was Fish and Wildlife Service, so I've got some family roots in Arkansas, and went back there to college and met my future wife and brought her back to Bethel, and we did 25 years there working for the school district, and this is now my 7th year with ASAA. And I've jokingly said this is how COVID has aged me this year. You know, it's what I feel like some days. But you know, I like to start these presentations and talk about, you know, why do we really do activities in the first place. And I may be kind of preaching to the choir a little bit this morning, but you know, we believe, and I like to cite my examples of a couple of studies that have been done through the NFHS on what activities has done for students. And I like to speak about it in terms of there's the short-term benefits. And by these, I mean those that really impact the student while they're a student. You know, they earn higher grade point averages, show better attendance, lower dropout rates, fewer discipline problems, greater self-concept, self-image, more physical activity and weight management skills. And then they start developing those social skills of teamwork, goal setting, leadership. I won't read it all to you. And again, these are the things that we believe impacts the student while they're in your buildings. But then later on, we also know that you get the lifetime benefit. And that's why we've developed this kind of tagline, win for life. We know that in the long run, they're going to demonstrate higher levels of leadership, higher career status, be more physically active as adults, volunteer more time, more likely to attend a college and complete a 4-year degree, and are significantly associated with reduced risk of hopelessness, suicidal issues, and so forth. We also recognize this isn't true for everybody. Then I like to add my non-researched beliefs. I like to think that activities really connect the student with another caring adult in their life. And we try to work with coaches to talk about it's a partnership with parents to help raise a teenager, so that a parent doesn't have to fight necessarily every battle. Let the coach fight some of those battles for you. It's also a really good way that we get parents into our schools in a positive way. I think educators often joke, we wish we could get the same attendance at a parent-teacher conference that we do at a basketball game. But it's a way to get the parents in the community together. And then it also, for many students, it lets them learn how to lose and keep on going, because we know that in a given year, we're going to have 80 schools attend our basketball tournament. 8 will win the championships. Most will have to deal with either they didn't make it to a state tournament or they didn't win the state tournament. But that's okay, because we now have that safety net in place, as opposed to somebody learning that for the first time later in life. Now we get into why we should consider offering activities this year. And we've cited this University of Wisconsin study that was conducted last spring. And they've also done a follow-up study this fall, which we now have linked to our website. But early on, some of the statistics that we saw was, and in the right side of my screen over here, you can see historically 68.6% of students reported minimal or no depression. While now, when sampled again in last spring, we now have 68% reporting mild to moderate to severe depression. So it's almost flipped in terms of those students. This chart shows their physical health, the amount of activity, has gone down 50%. Quality of life scores, as reported by students, have gone down in the spring. So right now, what I'm kind of trying to have established is, at a really small percentage of a school's budget, we get great benefit to our students, but also that activities this year are important because it keeps those students engaged and so forth. So now the big question is, how do we manage our activity programs this year? And I jokingly say, I have no clue. Please enjoy the rest of your conference. But in reality, I do have a couple of suggestions. So we've helped design some mitigation plans that we think are a good starting point for schools as they're looking at they're putting together an activity program. And most schools then were able to work, or we encourage you to work with DHSS to design that mitigation plan. They won't approve it, it's not really their role, but they want to be consulted in those designs. And I think, if you, as a school, you can put together a design for a particular activity. You can consult with Dr. Olson and a few others, and if they saw any glaring holes, they would let you know. And I think as educators, we know how to plan for students, but we're not necessarily all, trained health professionals. So they can work with you. Then you got to work with your coaches to make sure they're adhering to the plan. Work with your students and parents to make sure they realize their behaviors will impact your ability to offer activities. So here's kind of what, again, were the key elements, I think, of putting together a COVID mitigation plan. And I'll skip through that. So how do you develop it? Again, you work with us. You look and see what other districts are doing. You don't have to invent the wheel. And then you consult with EHSS. We've just, on our website, if you went to ASAA.org, you would, on the resource tab, our very first link would be to this COVID resource page. And we post information there throughout the page where we've put in some practice recommendations, event guideline recommendations, and then we actually even get into the sports specific recommendations. And this is an older slide. We now have some other sports put in there. We've also adopted rule modifications for the years that we believe makes the activities safer to run. And these are just some of the highlights of those documents. Parent coach education is important. We are recommending that coaches take the COVID-19 Coach and Administration Learning course. It's a free course, which if you click on that link would take you right to the NFHS Learn. Our coaches should be familiar with that site because that's where we are required coaches education for fundamentals of coaching and sports first aid. Most go to that site for meeting those requirements. A little bit of the course details. Nate, this is also just a really good site, I think, for schools to look at some of the courses. I'll make a quick side note. A lot of times our small schools don't often have a lot of students that are anticipating playing beyond high school, but then they will. And there's some requirements from the NCAA that there's a course here that your school counselors and whatnot would probably want to have some information. But this particular course was designed for COVID mitigation. We think this is a real key right here. We have to convince students and their parents that their behaviors when they're not at practice and competitions are what really matters. And this was really backed up by a recent study from the NFL. Well, they found that there was very limited, if any, COVID spread from one team to another during a game. But the spread was happening when their players were in meeting rooms, not wearing masks, when they were, taking risk, if you will, in their personal lives and so forth. So we really have to stress to our students that, what you're doing, we can keep you safe at a practice and while you're playing, but you're more at risk and you're going to jeopardize the team with what you're doing off the field. So we've put together some information on that, which is also, it's a PowerPoint that can be downloaded, and then a school district can tweak it, can use that as a framework, and we think that's a really key part of a team's not having to go into quarantine. And we address these kinds of topics in there. Event guidelines, ensuring your ventilation systems are working. It's not always feasible to open a door in a lot of parts of the state, but where it is, signage in terms of, where you can sit, where you can be, keeping the participants and the spectators separated. And that may mean that you only pull out one set of your bleachers in your gym. Our goal for state tournaments is that we would allow no more than 2 spectators per participant. Our goal is really to see if we can get the parents into the game, but we're not looking to, have our typical crowds, if you will. Coming up with this was at a volleyball tournament in Wash-sha-ta, and the game gets over, and Wash-sha-ta, who's the host, they come through and they clean all the bleachers and everything, or excuse me, the benches before the next team is allowed to use them. But a lot of our games are just single games, and but if you're running a tournament, you got to think about the amount of time between games will probably have to be a lot greater in the past. And this is a little bit of a volleyball recommendation as you get into a little bit more sports specific. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in greater detail later, but the CDC recommendation is that we wear a mask where feasible, especially if it's difficult to stay less than 6 feet apart. And so we are now, I believe, going to take action at the board level that masks are going to have to be worn for all indoor sports, and for outdoor sports where you generally do not maintain a 10-foot distance. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. There's also some good school districts. We really recommend for school districts to look at what Anchorage and Fairbanks are doing and kind of use that as a jumping off point. And we have some links to them on our website. Anchorage, I think, typically doesn't travel as much as the rest of the state. So Fairbanks has a little bit more of the travel piece included in theirs. And if you go to those websites, they've got it boiled down to different sports, and again, Fairbanks is a good mitigation in terms of the travel stuff. So ultimately, the school district determines that this mitigation is approved, but DHS is very willing to consult, and so are we on that. And then ultimately, the school district has to decide, are they going to offer an activity? So you get into kind of the risk level of activities. So, the lowest risk would be a student just practicing on their own at home. The next, at a higher risk is conducting a team practice. where maybe still you're not doing any kind of team drills. Higher than that would be competition, an inter-squad game. Next level is competition within your area. And then we as a state tournament probably come then the competition from teams in different areas. So as ASAA, we've set some basic criteria for when we would have a state championship. And so what we've said, and it's coming up pretty quickly for basketball, is we will reach out to the conferences and they have to let us know if they have the teams playing that would be willing to come to state if they earn the berth. We know we're going to have some conferences, for example, in 1A basketball, that are going to say, as schools, we haven't been playing at all. Lower Kuskokwim would be a good example of that. We would anticipate them saying, we will not be filling our one berth. And then based upon how many schools would be willing to attend and the berth allocation, we might bring in other teams to fill out a bracket, or we might reduce the amount of teams. And this is a specific example coming up to basketball. So the 3A, 4A, or larger schools will be telling us on the 25th, which is a week from tomorrow, whether or not they're going to be able to fill their berths. 1A, 2A has until March 4th. Getting back to the issue of masks, we will be voting. ASAA staff will be recommending to our board of directors that they adopt a mask policy for indoor and outdoor events. And our two remaining indoor events are basketball and wrestling. For outdoor events, it'll probably say when social distancing can't be maintained. And an example that I can give to you of that would be, we would not require the center fielder in baseball, who's probably 100 feet from the nearest person, to have to wear a mask. But the catcher and the batter might, because they're right there next to each other. Soccer probably would be required because there's a lot of anticipated contact there. Track, depending on how the meets are set up, we might, if you're using like every third lane, you could probably get away from not doing it, but probably we'll be wearing them in track as well. We will also be reviewing the testing requirements to attend a state tournament. And this one's a little bit more tricky just from the standpoint of, we want to make sure that whatever the policy is doable for our schools from a logistical and a fiscal standpoint. But Department of Health and Social Services has been working with school districts to help them get access to antigen testing. So our testing requirements, and this is still in the development stage, if you will, is that it needs to be able to be met through antigen or PCR testing. So what we believe it'll come out to say is the testing requirement may be satisfied by taking a PCR test within 48 hours of competition. And if you're participating in multiple games within 72-hour tests, you're good to go, okay? If you've taken the PCR test within 48 hours and you haven't got your results in, then we could use a same-day negative antigen test. We think most of the school districts will not do that because the PCR test is pretty expensive and it'll depend on, whether the student is insured and the cost, have they met their deductible and so forth. So the antigen testing can be met by doing a twice weekly model or a once weekly model. And the difference is in the amount of time between the tests. And so there's a few details to be worked out on this, but I'm kind of working right now with municipality of Anchorage and Health and Social Services, and I'm hoping that we can have this having their approval, and then getting it out to the school districts to make sure they feel like they can meet this. Participants who have had COVID, okay, would be exempt from testing, provided they're asymptomatic and have completed the isolation period. But it should be noted, we are recommending that a student that has had COVID should also be cleared by their medical person there in their lives prior to returning, particularly if they've been, if they've had a bad case of COVID, because there's the fear there of how that can impact the heart and so forth. So I'll put in a plug right now. I think it's also very important that schools are reviewing their emergency action plans, particularly how it could apply to sudden cardiac arrest and the availability of an AED at all their practices and games. Vaccinated athletes will not be exempt due to the science right now not showing if it really prevents the spread. So basically, we recognize that the districts have to weigh this risk and have to determine whether or not it's acceptable amount of, within their community. And it could simply, the risk could outweigh the benefits. So we've tried to be real clear all year. We're not trying to shame or make somebody feel guilty if they determine that they can't run a state tournament or they couldn't see an ability to attend a state tournament or participate in an activity. We want you to know we're here to help you make that decision. But we also want to say that, we do think activities are very important for those reasons we discussed earlier today. So I'm just going to kind of jump off now and stop the share and see if there's any questions out there.
We had a few people join in partway and was just wondering if there was any information, Melissa or Teresa, if you might want some more information on.
Will we be able, I noticed that we're recording, are we going to be able to share this information with our administrators in our buildings?
By all means, we'll be pushing out the testing stuff to districts as well. And I attend a statewide kind of superintendent's partner group about every other week. And there's been some discussion there. And I know that association is is engaging the superintendents. We feel like the testing creates a stronger mitigation plan, but it's important people realize it's not like foolproof. It strengthens mitigation plans, but it's not to be done, it's not like, oh, well, now that we're testing, we don't have to do all this other part of our mitigation plans. And our concern would be that as a statewide organization, we're not putting something out there that only an Anchorage and Fairbanks can meet. But I do think some districts have already started doing some testing, and the CDC recommendation is real clear. They don't recommend it testing just the average student, but the state's now saying they do think for activity participants, it makes sense to do so. But it is being recorded, and I believe they can share it with you to answer your question.
I just have a, excuse me, a quick question. I work with young adults I live in Juneau, but we also do, my son's a basketball player, and he's also a baseball player. So of course I had some parent type questions, and I'm not gonna, get in your face about it, but specifically district, it's the decision to play and have spectators is ultimately up to each district. Is that kind of what I understood?
It's either up to the district or the local municipality.
Okay.
So, and I can really only cite Anchorage right now. The municipality of Anchorage's rule right now for indoor activities is if the number of participants exceeds 15, then you can't have any spectators. So that wouldn't have been the ASD decision. I think they would have allowed a capacity of their building in.
Right.
So I can't speak in terms of whether or not that's a Juneau school district or a municipality of Juneau decision there.
So just to give you an example, Juneau, we're pretty clear on cases as far as our students go, but we had to travel to Sitka to watch our son play a game live. So we just did that last weekend because Sitka is allowing spectators to parents, and you take your temperature, you fill out the log, you answer the questions. I mean, they're following the mitigation strategies, but in Juneau, they still have not let us attend. They're talking about letting parents attend maybe for senior night this weekend, but it's still kind of up in the air. So I'm just trying to kind of figure out. And then the other question I had was, you mentioned earlier about baseball, and my son is a catcher. So last year he did not have to wear a mask, but of course they wear the face mask as a catcher anyway. Are you saying that they may have to wear an additional mask in addition to the one that they already have?
So potentially yes, to answer
Okay.
your question, but then let me fill it in a little bit more if I can. So the mask that we're using in hockey is a one that fits inside the face guard. It's kind of almost like a plexiglass, if you will. And that is meeting our requirement for masks. Now, if they have like a half of a deal, then we're saying you have to have a cloth mask worn properly below. Some of the concern on the mask is that the new variants are so much more contagious. And I think schools really battle between, let me rewind. What I think we found out this fall, unfortunately, is that it's almost easier to have activities if you're not doing in-person learning, because you're not quarantining your entire English class because of a close contact or something. So if you're trying to get back to in-person learning and do activities, you really have to try to make sure you're strengthening that activity side, and maybe even beyond what's necessary, because it can now impact how you're actually running your building. And Mat-Su School District is probably the biggest test case on that, because they've been trying to do in-person learning, and they've had issues at a basketball game, then all of a sudden they're having to shut down the whole building. So that's, I think, the constant battle or decision making that school districts are having to go. Getting back to the spectator piece, we are getting ready to announce today, I believe, that we will be moving our basketball tournaments out to the Mat-Su Valley, because currently Anchorage will not let a non-Muni team come into the Muni to participate. Now, again, that's a municipality of Anchorage rule, not an Anchorage school district rule. Okay, so we've got to have a place to, and we believe with strong mitigations, we can put on a safe basketball event. What we've asked the Mat-Su is, in doing that we would be allowed to bring in 2 spectators per participant. And so we do plan on letting parents attend the state tournament, much like you described was going on in Sitka. There'll be a requirement for screening. There'll be masks. There'll be sectioned off where, let's say Juneau's playing West Valley from Fairbanks. There'll be kind of designed areas in the bleachers for those different communities. We're building a larger schedule between the games so that those parents can come in, watch teams play, they exit. Now we get the little misters out and we sanitize the space, and then we bring in the next crowd for the next game, which requires more facilities for us because normally, we're in the Alaska Airlines Center and people just come in as before the game. But, we've found people pretty willing to work with you if you can provide the opportunity for their kids. But we do think it's, important. The other piece we feel like is, these are still high school age students, and unfortunately there can be serious injuries that can take place at an event, and in those cases we want the parent there. I mean, they're obviously the kid's number one caregiver, and we have medical people there to deal with that. But we think we would hate for a parent not to be in that venue if something very significant injury wise happened. We hope that's not a need. We hope you're just there cheering on your children, but that's another factor that we believe is important, and maybe you should be trying to make that point locally.
Yeah, we've been working with the school board and trying to, the other thing we've been trying to do is not have the kids wear masks, because these kids are playing practices. They're all on each other's bubble anyway. They all come to my house or someone else's house and of course hang out, and they all go to school together. But at the same time, wearing those masks, I see my son struggling when they're running 2 and 3 hour practices and they can wring out their masks, and they switch them out, every couple of, every 30 minutes or so. I can't imagine that's very healthy for them, but that's.
We've studied that quite a bit and believe there's a reason we don't normally wear a mask. And I'm not about to say it wouldn't be, aggravating, but the issue of mask also, I think, increases the likelihood we're able to have a state tournament. I think without that requirement, we wouldn't get the buy-in from districts, and particularly, our host site district does have a mask requirement in, and I was a 20-year basketball coach, and I feel for the requirement, the piece, the aggravation of it all. But I think, and I would guess your son, if the choice was no basketball or basketball with a mask, it's probably a no-brainer at that point.
Right. No, he's going to wear a mask. There's no question about it, but I see them struggling, and it's just unfortunate to have that. And I know some other states, Texas and a few other, they're not requiring masks, but yeah, it's a no-brainer. If he gets to play, he's wearing a mask.
Yeah, and again, there's, I think, 18 states now requiring masks, and I think we're going to join that group. And a lot of it, I think, again, from a school district level, I think knowing that, I think the testing strengthens the mitigation plans. I think the masks do as well. Okay, so I'd like to think that's the primary reason we're doing it. Like the part B of that is, I think it gets school districts willing to attend state tournaments, and gives us the opportunity, not because it's riskier, but I think if Juneau knows that, hey, all the Fairbanks kids passed the testing and all the Anchorage kids will pass the testing, then even though, the host community may have certain metrics, we've boiled it down into a safer event and more likely to allow participation.
Okay, thank you for the information. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Katie and I were talking earlier, and usually no one fusses if a conference gets over a little bit early, okay, especially if we're sitting on a computer. So I can stay and answer questions, but if not, maybe we'll just call it a morning and I'll grab a cup of coffee before I jump into my next zone.
All right, any other last minute questions?
No, I'll just say thanks a lot, Billy, for rolling with it and sharing the information. And we'll keep an eye on news after the board meeting. That's next week, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm putting my email in the chat. It's just billy@asa.org. Feel free to email me directly if you have a question or if I can help you. Also on our website, there are all those informations, and I think it's under the About section on our homepage is a link to our board meeting. It's on Zoom, so if you're ever curious and want to just kind of have us running in the background, we're going to have that going next week. And we do have a public comment section if if you want to look at the agenda and give comments on something. We like to know what's going on and people's thoughts. I think the board takes those comments seriously. People don't always get what they want, but I think it's nice to know that all the perspectives when decisions are made. So appreciate you guys attending this morning, and I guess we're done.
All right, thanks so much, Billy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.